So this session is quite different from the typical prompting and LLM talk. For this demo, we're not prompt engineering an LLM here to get a specific result, specifically code. What the intention is, we are describing a product intent and see how Hope, our architecture agent, can turn it into an architecture at the end. So Hope is a developer architecture agent. It builds real code, version with tests, released. It's discoverable, is reusable, and then you can share across. That means prompting Hope has different rules than prompting on other LLMs like ChatGPT or Claude, like you're used to. So today we want to focus on the part that matters most early on, starting with Hope, which is how to prompt effectively with Hope so you can get the output you desire correctly, and then how to refine the prompt, how to refine the result when Hope gets. And they're two different things, and they should stay separate. And when we blend them together, like if you start prompting how we refine things at the component level, at an architecture level, the results become a bit inconsistent, and that's something we want to highlight. Before I dive into the example, I'll give a quick overview of the structure of the webinar. I'm going to show 5 examples back to back. They're going to be very quickly. I won't be going into much details about the code. Just architectural, show you the results, show you what I prompted and what the output was at the end. And then at the end, what I will do is I'll go back to demo 1 and I'll show you, how we can edit and refine the results we've got from Hope itself. So the 5 examples, flow like this. We'll have a small self-contained example, a slightly richer example with more specific details at the component level, an example that shows how you can give a specific screenshot to Hope and allow it to recreate it, and then an example to show how you can just throw a URL at Hope and let Hope take over completely and generate and produce code and products with the URL itself. And then at the end, we will dive into a much more complex, a full product architecture with complete backend, APIs, and everything, something which resembles, production grade product would look like, and how Hope can enable it. So you can see literally the spectrum of the capabilities of Hope itself. So let's dive in to demo 1. And before I dive in, a few things I want to highlight. The first prompt you give to Hope has to describe your intention, not details. You will be describing what we are building and not dive into how. The specific implementation detail, this is not the right place for it. Few other things to know while prompting Hope. There are several things Hope already know about, so you don't have to go and describe it again. By default, Hope will use React, so you don't have to tell it to use React. You don't have to mention about a file structure. Hope is designed to build reusable components with a well-defined file structure and namings and everything. You don't have to define any folders or use existing code. For Hope's context, Hope has access to all of your code within Bit itself. I think this is one of the few things that separate Hope from other LLMs, where when you're prompting an LLM, you need to make sure its context has a lot of information so it can give you the right results. Hope's context already has access to everything you have already built and released. You don't need to tell Hope to write tests or CI/CD. Everything is baked in. It will come with full documentation. It will come with full-fledged tests as well. So all of this you can skip and then focus on the intention and describing what we are building here. So for demo 1, you will see this is a very simple My Posted Wall app. All I asked from Hope was build me a posted wall app. Add notes, make sure we can add text and color and delete notes and shuffle notes. And I mentioned persistent local storage, so I wanted to make sure when I switch across tabs or it preserves the state itself. What you will notice is I didn't mention any more details here. Nothing about autofocus, nothing about accessibility, nothing about animations, no specific details about the style. My focus over here was to just tell it high-level idea what the product looks like. And Hope one-shotted it, you will see here. What the first thing Hope does, and this is again in contrast to other LLMs, where when you ask an LLM, it will just output you stuff. And then you review and you're like, oh, I didn't want this. Hope's first response is to propose a composition plan, which we also call an architecture, where Hope says, okay, in order for me to build something like this is how I think I will structure it for you. So in this, you will see Hope came up and said, we will need some design tokens and design language, but I don't need to rebuild this. you already have a design system I can reuse. I can access it from your account. So I will use the theme from it. I will use the card component. I will use the button from there, and all the design primitives. So you will see it will clearly highlight what it will reuse. This is very critical and very, very powerful. That means that Hope is not regenerating stuff, which is also a pitfall with other LLMs. They keep on regenerating the code that exists, and the more stuff you regenerate, the surface area for making, for it to go wrong increases. Then what it does is Hope creates a scope. Scope is where, it describes the business domain for the feature itself. It's like, okay, you're asking me to build a post-it wall app. Let me create a scope called notes, where I will have an application. It will show you it's an application. So every component here, it's either a component, it's a UI component or a backend component, or a full-fledged application that can be deployed as well. So here it suggested a notes app. It shows you what dependencies it will use from where. So from within the notes scope, it will use the grid, the editor, the hook to fetch the notes. Then we'll go back to our design scope where it will reuse stuff for page layout, buttons and theming, etc. And then it also generates a prompt for us, which describes, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see clearly. So it will create a prompt for us where it says, create a post-it wall application that allows us to add, delete, and shuffle notes and integrate notes. Great for displaying notes as well. This is your opportunity to either refine the prompt, review it, and then let Hope generate it. So for the purpose of example one, I didn't make any changes. I let Hope propose an architecture. I let Hope propose a prompt, and then I just click generate. You will see. So it will generate prompts for every single component over here. Once I click generate, this was the output over here, where it created this note app, and I will show you in full screen, where I can go and type my note. So my note 7, let's give it a new color, mint green, and then add it. And you will see it adds, and it lets me shuffle it. Great, I can delete it, and that's it. By default, it has some accessibility features baked in, like, I can use my mouse to tap through stuff, delete it, all of that. But this is what Hope one-shotted before me even giving it any specific detail. So the message, from this example, what I want to give is the main prompt has to be very focused on what the product is. Describe what the intention of the product is. Don't give any technical details, and you will see how still Hope will produce a fully working app. You can dive into the components. There are a few tabs. An application will show you the actual app that Hope built, so you can view it. But you can also see the components that actually at the end compose the application itself. And this is the bit way of building things and scaling things at the end, where everything is built with these reusable applications, because once I deploy them, they will become part of the context for Hope. So once you go back to Hope and ask it to build something else, it now has access to a notes app, a note editor, and it can reuse it. So you will see these are all the components it built. We can look at them as a graph as well, where we have a notes scope and a design scope, and a note scope use components from the design scope itself. Within the note scope, it will show you the graph which shows, what the note scope itself has. The application uses the grid uses the card, it also uses the editor as well. So that's the first example. So continuing on this, I'm going to go into the example part 2, which is very similar. So here I asked Hope to build, exactly similar, build a Post-it app to track all my notes. You will see it's the exact same prompt. But the difference over here was, at this point, I actually wanted to give more fine-grained implementation level details to Hope. And you will notice that I never mentioned it as part of the architecture prompt, because the architecture prompt, again, is solely to describe the intention of the product itself without diving into any more details. So Hope came back with an architecture. It created a note app, a note wall, a card, and an editor. And this is where I wanted more details. And as part of this, what I wanted this to have is stuff like, hey, can you show a word count when I write it in the note editor? Can you make sure there are some animations? Can you make sure they're, it's completely accessible from, as all the accessibility is baked in? And this is where I gave all the details. I asked it to make sure, it auto saves on any change. It preserves focus. It shows a nice empty state message. It shows, there's accessibility factors built into it, the interactions, how it should do. And then the end result was something like this, where now, when I create a new note, you will see, like when I type, here is my new note, it added a nice little word count. This was not part of the main prompt, and it should never be part of the main prompt, because these are implementation details. This was at the individual component prompt level. I also asked it to let me add a title to the note, so I can now add a title. This is my title. With accessibility, I can pick here the colors from my keyboard and then just save it. And then basically, a similar notes app with more specific details around how I want the implementation to look like. So this is where I wanted to show the difference between the two examples. The first one focused just on the product intent to show you how it looks like without any more specific details of the behavior. The second one, took forward the first example, added more specific details about the word count, the accessibility, and other things, making sure I can add the title. And this is where it lived in the component level prompt itself. So this is the proof. This is what it shows. Step one is all about architecture. The way you talk with step one is the way you talk to a coworker, where you're explaining the product we are trying to build without going into any more technical detail. The step two is when you dive into the implementation detail discussions within the team itself on how the implementation details should look like. So now my examples are solely focused on text-based prompting. Hope has a more capability than just text-based. It's incredible at taking either an attachment, a screenshot, and recreating it as well. So in this, what I asked Hope to do is, I went to Notion. Everyone knows what Notion is. They have one of the most well-designed applications. And I took a screenshot of their pricing plan, just this part. I sent it to Hope and it says, can you recreate the pricing plan section for me? And then Hope went ahead and did exactly that. It proposed an architecture. It said, I will reuse all the design components that already been built. And then I will propose a pricing plan scope that will include all the implementation for it. And how I will compose this is I will have a new icon for the check mark, a new UI for pricing toggle, a pricing plan card, and the pricing plans section will compose everything together. And the end result was something like this. And this is what it one-shotted again. It visually looks different in terms of the design language. The reason is because it's reusing my existing design system, my design tokens, my theming, not Notions. So structurally and layout, it looks very identical to what I gave it here. The colors and the theming and the design language itself looks different because it's reusing all the design primitives and the design language, which I already had released as part of my scope. So that's the third demo that shows, if you have a screenshot, you can just feed it to Hope and ask it to recreate it. And it will do an incredible job reproducing it completely. The next feature is where Hope shines, is you can actually give it a URL here completely, where you can say, without even a screenshot, can you recreate this page for me? And I tried to be more bold with this, where I said, go to chipotle.com and try to build that page, the homepage you see at chipotle.com, and nothing else. Again, it's the same. It will propose an architecture. For the architecture itself, it will show you what it reuses. It will show you what new components it will build. In this case, it will be a food ordering header, a location, and then this is your opportunity to either add refinements or just continue. For the sake of this example, I added no refinements at all. So at this point, all Hope had was a single URL, and that's it, no other details. This is the web page, for an example, what it looks like for Chipotle, if you go there. And this is what Hope recreated in one shot. It read the text, it saw, oh, the banner image looks like talking for red chimichurri. So I should make sure that includes that. The images are a little off, but that's okay. It created a menu section highlight as well. Where to find Chipotle, sign in. But you can see very similar result of what I expected with just a URL. And this shows the other side of Hope, where you can just give it a URL. Hope will break it down into section. It will break it down into components. It will compose them, and it will try to generate it. And then it will first decompose it, where it will go to the URL, identify the components, decompose them into individual components, and then it will compose them back into an application that mimics what the URL is. And then the last example, because all these examples have been very, very, very simple so far. It's either building a simple Notes app or add refinement to a Notes app, taking a screenshot, trying to recreate it, going to a URL, trying to recreate it. But production-grade applications are a completely different beast. There's a lot more than just recreating simple stuff there. So this is where Hope shines, and the capabilities of Hope outshine a lot of other LLMs, where it can build full-fledged applications. So in this case, in this example, what I asked Hope to do was, build a shared weekly planner app for household and small teams. There's an option for backend. You will see when you include this, this will ensure that when Hope thinks about the architecture and composes these components, it will include all the backend pieces. So by default, it will use MongoDB, and for API by default, it will use GraphQL. But if you want REST, you can prompt Hope to use REST, and it will make a REST first architecture. This is where my first main prompt was focused on describing the product intent again. So I said, plan meals for a 7-day week. Recipes live in a library that can be referenced with ingredients, quantities, steps, tags, and nutrition facts. Ask it to auto-generate a grocery list from the weekly plan. I told it, if there are duplicate ingredients, merge them, group them by category. I gave a little bit more detail about how to do pantry tracking, mark items on hand so they don't appear on the list, restore them when depleted. This is what you expect, a product manager, if you're working with one in your team and working on a new feature, will describe how the product functions. These are the user stories, essentially, will look like, without going into the implementation details. Then I wanted it to be multi-user. I said, make sure I can invite collaborators from the same household to see who changed what. It should be able to work across devices. It should auto sync. There should be optimistic updates so it feels snappy. And offline, it should be able to work offline. If the internet goes off, the state should stay captured. And then I asked it to build some views: a weekly planner, a recipe library, a grocery list, a pantry, and activity. And then I gave it some product constraints as part of this. Make sure there's a single source of truth across the shared members, something more about access control, where an owner, member, and viewer, there are 3 different levels of access control to include. And then make sure it includes grid defaults for accessibility and keyboard navigation. This is a pretty extensive product, with a lot more features. It's full blown. I'm going to focus mostly on architecture. We're not going into generation part. That will be part of another webinar where we will solely focus on platforms itself. But what Hope did is it went through our existing organization and found the scopes it can reuse, like it always does. So you will see again, it went to our mid-design scope and it says, I will reuse all the design primitives you have, including the tokens and themes and all the design components you have. Then I will build a platform, a meal planner platform, and in which I will have the platform itself that lets you, compose APIs and everything, and backend. So it will include all the details. So make sure there's logging, logout, password reset, user management, multi-level device syncing. This is all the details. And you can see the APIs also it proposed. You should be able to create a user, log in a user, etc. And then all the components that it needs to compose the platform itself, authentication, login pages, sign-up pages, weekly planners, protected routes. Some routes should not be publicly accessible. They should only be accessible if you're authenticated. So it went full-fledged ahead and designed this architecture. Then it found out that we have already a people scope, and this is very, very powerful and fascinating, where it says, I don't need to rebuild the people management part of your feature. You have already built it as part of your previous generation or release. I can access it. So it went in and started reusing it. It has a people aspect where it knows which entity to use to describe a user profile, what hooks to use to fetch it, what pages to use to show profile information, the user card, the member list, all of this it will reuse and compose as part of this. And went ahead to build a household scope to include all the household features for collaboration. It will allow users to create households, invite collaborators, manage membership. It will provide APIs for managing access and all the components that will, compose this feature itself. The next feature was activity. Again, this was for activity tracking and everything. Then for pantry, recipes, meal planning, grocery lists, and you will see it's a full-fledged architecture with quite a lot of components here. It's about 103. This is your opportunity where you review the architecture. You go into each individual component. You add design. If you're working with a designer, you have some design Figma files or Adobe XD files. You make sure you include them. You work on the implementation details of each component and give rich context to Hope. And then you press generate. And then this is where Hope will go in and try to will build this complete application end to end for you. And this is where Hope shines, and this is where other LLMs, are not as great because of how big the context gets and how context can get clogged very quickly. And this is where you also see Hope's architectural literacy shines, where it understands how to break down a complex ask into individual components and compose them. And yeah, so this shows, and we will dive more deeper into platforms in our upcoming webinars. Um, I want to go back to the refinement part, which I didn't touch, but so far I've shown how generation works, how to prompt correctly for generations. And quickly for refinement, what I will show is every time when Hope generates stuff, you have a lane. A lane is similar to a branch in Git, you can imagine, where it includes all the components as part of what the generation was. You and the agent share the lane, and you and the agent also share a workspace. You will see it says edit code. When you click on edit code, it opens up a Visual Studio Cloud workspace over here. This is incredibly powerful. What that means is you can look at the code what Hope generated. You can changes. As soon as you make changes, the agent live has access to your changes. So you're collaborating with an agent live. You're either fixing stuff, maybe because it generated in one way and you wanted it to generate the other way, or you're adding more stuff and working with the agent. So that's one way to refine stuff, where you can edit code, go to a cloud-based VS Code session, and take over by yourself and just go on and change code. The other part is when you go to a lane, you have this little widget where you can just ask Hope to do it for you. If they're, if you want LLM to take over, you just say, hey, can you change the note editor? You make sure you mention the component you want to change. So in this case, you can look at it. So there's a note editor. So change the note editor component to include the word count, because the first example didn't have a word count. And that's it. And you press go. It will work on, it will identify the component, and it will propose a change. And then the workflow is very, very similar. Exactly. So this is where you don't need to rewrite the whole prompt. You have the shared collaboration workspace you can reuse with Hope and then continue from here. So that's pretty much it for this webinar.